Welcome to the Iran 1400 Project podcast, where we explore the past, present, and possible futures of Iran through informed dialogue, independent thought, and diverse voices. From historical insight to emerging narratives, we connect ideas to action in the pursuit of a more just, inclusive, and forward-looking society. Join us as we rethink Iran's trajectory, one conversation at a time.
Today, we're taking a plunge into a really thought-provoking subject, the complex nature of power and authority, specifically looking at Iran.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
And the central question we're tackling, really, is how can power be reimagined? How does it shift from, a tool of domination to an instrument of actual service?
That's the core of it. And for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on a great article by Vafa Mostahim for the Iran 1400 Project. It's called Power and the Public Good: Reimagining Authority in Iran's Civic Future. Just came out June 23, 2025.
Right. So our mission today is basically to unpack the key insights from that text, give you a kind of shortcut to understanding how power, authority, and public service have evolved historically in Iran.
And then think about how that reimagining, that shift to service, could shape the future.
Okay, so let's start with that foundational idea. Power in Iran's modern history. Often seen as domination, right? Monarchs, military ideology.
Exactly. Wielded over people. But the article pushes this alternative. Power redefined as service.
Power as service. It sounds, fundamentally different. How do thinkers like Aram Hassami put that into words? What does it mean for authority to be based on responsibility, not just control?
Hassami's argument is that the ethical core of authority should be that responsibility to others. It's not just about having power, but how you use it. And in the Iranian context specifically, authority has often swung back and forth between being really fragmented and then suddenly highly centralized.
But often without genuine consent or trust from the public.
Precisely. That lack of a participatory foundation, it's a constant threat.
So why does that happen? If legitimate rule isn't really participatory, what's driving things underneath?
Well, this brings us to a really key concept from Abbas Amanat, this enduring tension between Darga and Divan.
Darga and Divan. Can you unpack those a bit?
Sure. Darga is basically the court, personal rule, the leader's inner circle. Think charisma, personal loyalty. Divan is the bureaucracy, the institutions, the state apparatus. And Amanat argues this tension, this push and pull between personal rule and institutional governance, explains a lot about that recurring conflict between too much centralization and then things falling apart into fragments. It's a pattern.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's trace that pattern. We need to go back historically to really see it play out. The late Qajar period. What did authority look like then? It sounds messy.
Oh, incredibly messy. Highly localized, very inconsistent. Justice, for instance, the article calls it a patchwork.
A patchwork?
Yeah, of customary norms, religious rulings, just arbitrary royal decisions, no single system. And education. No state coordination at all.
So power was really just about your social standing, your hierarchy. Public service wasn't even really a concept for the government.
Exactly. Power equals status, privilege. It wasn't tied to any formal responsibility to the public good.
Okay, then boom. The Constitutional Revolution of 1906. That sounds like a major turning point. What changed? What was the new vision?
It was huge. Suddenly, the conversation shifts. The new vision emphasizes things like legal codification, accountability, and public welfare.
Right. And you get the first national parliament, the Majlis, and the Iranian civil code, trying to build institutions.
Exactly. Laying the foundation for structured institutional governance, a move away from that arbitrary localized power.
And new ministries like justice and education pop up to handle these things formally. But was it a clean break?
No, not quite. That's a key point. Religious courts, for example, they kept jurisdiction over family law, so you still had this kind of bifurcated two-track legal system.
Ah, okay.
Amanat would likely point to this as part of that Darga-Divan tension again, an early attempt to build the divan, the institutions, but it was incomplete. The older ways persisted alongside the new.
Got it. All right, let's move forward then. The Pahlavi era. The article calls this modernization through centralization. First up, Reza Shah, 1925 to 41. A decisive turn, it says, toward state-led modernization.
Oh, definitely. Reza Shah was all about consolidation, sweeping reforms. He secularized and standardized courts, education, built infrastructure, pushed this idea of a unified Persian identity.
Sounds efficient. Consolidating sovereignty, making the administration work better.
It did, in many ways. But there was a significant downside. A trade-off.
Okay, what was the trade-off? What was the cost of that top-down modernization drive?
Well, the article highlights that these gains often came at the expense of civic participation and pluralism. Dissent wasn't tolerated. Broader society was often excluded from the process.
So modernization, but not necessarily democratization.
Precisely. And even the secular reforms had limits, like Sharia law still applied to personal status, family law. So efficiency, yes, but inclusivity, not so much.
Right. And then his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, takes over from 41 to 79. He continues and even expands the modernization, doesn't he? The White Revolution comes to mind.
Yeah, the White Revolution was significant. Land redistribution, giving women the vote, expanding access to education, healthcare. It definitely helped grow a modern middle class.
Material improvements, then. People's lives getting better in some way.
In some ways, yes. And this is crucial, the political system itself. Still highly centralized and resistant to dissent.
So the underlying structure didn't really change.
Not fundamentally in terms of participation.
No.
You had professionalization of the judiciary, but then also politicization. Independent civil society organizations were really constrained.
And then there was Civic.
Right. The security apparatus, Civic, reinforced this model of governance based on surveillance and control, not participation.
So even with those material gains from the White Revolution, the lack of ways for people to actually participate, to have a voice, it just wore away at the regime's legitimacy over time.
Exactly. It's a classic problem. Material progress without political inclusion often proves unsustainable. People want to say, not just stuff.
Which leads us, inevitably, to the Islamic Revolution. The article labels this phase theocratization and the bureaucratization of service, a total reshaping of authority.
A profound shift, yes. Authority gets rebuilt entirely within a theocratic framework. The supreme leader sits at the top of this clerical system, and religious oversight is woven into everything the state does.
What did that mean practically on the ground?
Well, for one thing, revolutionary courts started taking over from the civil legal system. Sharia-based law became dominant.
Which led to?
Often, politicized trials, less transparency. Judicial independence was really compromised. Here again, Amanat's concepts are useful thinking about din, religion, and dolat, the state, becoming formally intertwined. Religious legitimacy became state authority.
Okay, so after the revolution, you see these new institutions emerge, like the bonyads. The article talks about the illusion of service. What's the illusion? They were supposed to be for public welfare, right?
That was the idea, yes, ostensibly for public welfare. But in practice, these bonyads grew to control huge parts of the economy.
With little oversight.
Very little transparency or public accountability. So the service aspect becomes questionable when the entities are so opaque and powerful. It raises big questions about who they're really serving.
Right. And even where services did expand, like in health, moving towards universal coverage, or in education, the article argues something was still missing.
Yes. The absence of local agency and pluralism limited their democratic legitimacy. Services might improve, but if people at the local level don't have a say, if diverse views aren't allowed, it lacks that democratic grounding.
And there's a specific case study mentioned, construction jihad, Jahad-e-Sazandegi. Eric Laub analyzed this. What does it show?
It's a really telling example. Construction jihad started out as this genuine grassroots volunteer movement. People going out to develop rural areas driven by revolutionary enthusiasm, a real spirit of service.
Sounds promising initially.
Very. But by 1983, it gets absorbed into the state bureaucracy. And Laub argues that this absorption eroded its participatory character. The grassroots energy got co-opted, bureaucratized.
So it shows how even something started with the best intentions, focused on service, can lose its way when it gets swallowed by a centralized state machine.
Yeah, exactly. It highlights the vulnerability of service-based initiatives to bureaucratic capture. It's not just about starting something good. It's about how you sustain that spirit, especially as you scale up.
A crucial challenge indeed. So this brings us to looking forward. The article shifts to revisiting power through the lens of service and proposes a new paradigm toward ethical authority. Hassami's idea of moral leadership comes back here. What does that actually involve?
Hassami defines it as leadership based on ethical integrity, on humility, and a deep commitment to the common good. not just power for its own sake.
And this isn't a totally new idea, is it?
Not at all. The article connects it to various traditions. Baha'i teachings talk about leadership as servitude to the people. Early Islamic governance had the concept of amana leadership as a sacred trust. You find similar threads in Confucianism, even Western democratic thought.
So if you reframe power as service, leadership becomes about responsibility, not entitlement. What does that imply for institutions, for education?
It implies designing institutions differently, prioritizing participation, making them transparent. And education becomes key, not just teaching facts, but fostering civic and ethical agency. Teaching people how to be responsible citizens, not just obedient ones.
Okay, but what does that look like practically? The article suggests some systemic reforms. Can you give some examples?
Sure. Things like genuine decentralized governance, pushing power down to local communities so they have real control over their affairs.
Instead of everything being run from the center?
Exactly. Also, ideas like participatory budgeting, where citizens get a direct say in how public money is spent in their area. Civic councils to boost accountability.
It sounds like building accountability from the ground up. What about the justice system?
The idea there is shifting towards a system oriented around restorative principles, focusing on repairing harm rather than just punishment. And underpinning all of this is educational reform that cultivates critical thinking, pluralism, and civic values.
Now, the article makes a point of saying these aren't just utopian abstractions.
Right. It emphasizes that these ideas, this yearning for accountability and service, they actually echo throughout modern Iranian history. You see hints of it in the Constitutional Revolution, in the early ideals, perhaps even the initial promises of the 1979 revolution.
And they're still alive today.
Yes, absolutely. In civil society movements, in grassroots efforts, even in informal ways people help each other out. These aspirations persist.
So the challenge for the future, if the service model is to take hold, is avoiding the fate of things like construction jihad, making sure institutions stay true to that service mission.
That's the core challenge. Future institutions need to be built to be adaptive, resilient. They need mechanisms to keep that spirit of service alive, even as they grow and become more established. Otherwise, bureaucracy and centralization tend to take over, losing the original purpose. It's a universal problem, really.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, the big takeaway seems to be this. Iran political history is full of attempts to wield power over people.
Yes, and the argument is that the path forward lies in cultivating models of power for the people, reimagining authority fundamentally as a public trust.
Exercise through service, not domination.
Exactly. Service defines leadership, not control. Justice guides law, not vengeance. Education shapes citizens, not just compliant subjects.
It's a call for a fundamental shift in thinking about power.
It is, not just changing institutions, but changing the very understanding of what authority is for in Iran's civic life.
Okay, so here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about these principles we've discussed, the shift from domination to service, the need for transparency, participation, ethical responsibility. How might these apply beyond Iran?
Yeah, think about any structure, any leadership role, anywhere.
Where do you see examples of genuine power for the people versus power over? And maybe what small steps could help foster more service-oriented authority in your own communities, your own contexts?
Something to mull over. It's a deep question with relevance far beyond this specific case.
Indeed.
Thank you for listening to the Iran 1400 Project podcast. The Iran 1400 Project invites scholars, experts, and intellectuals to share their assessment of the evolution of institutions and ideas during the past 100 years to inspire a vision of Iran in the 1400s. If you found today's episode thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. For more content and upcoming events, visit Iran1400.org. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.